the first time I saw the old man. He was sitting quietly on the cracked steps of the subway entrance, hands folded in his lap, like he was waiting for a train that never came. The SWAT team arrived 5 minutes later, storming the scene with guns drawn and voices barking orders, as if he were some dangerous criminal. But the only crime here was their own blindness. "Hands where we can see him. Now," barked Lieutenant Harris, his voice thick with disdain and something darker, something like hatred disguised as authority. The old man didn't move. His eyes were steady, a calmness in the chaos around him that unsettled the younger officers. "Sir, we need to see your hands," demanded Officer Briggs, his finger twitching near his holstered weapon. The crowd gathered, whispers growing louder. Cameras recorded, phones lifted high. And then, through the shouting and confusion, the old man's voice cut clear and steady. 5 simple words that shattered the walls built by prejudice. "I am my brother's keeper." The air was thick with tension, the flashing red and blue lights painting everyone in harsh, unflattering hues. Around me, faces hardened with suspicion and fear. They called it a routine check. We all knew better. Lieutenant Harris, a man whose rage seemed to simmer just beneath his skin, scanned the old man with a gaze that didn't seek truth but confirmation of bias. "You match the description," Harris said, as if that justified the creeping dread settling over the street. "Mr. Johnson, please step away from the stairs," Officer Briggs said, voice sharper now. The elderly man rose slowly, unthreatening but defiant. Wrinkles carved stories of decades of struggle and survival across his face. His eyes held a quiet wisdom that none of us were ready to see. "Why are you bothering me?" the old man asked, voice calm but strong. "We have reports of suspicious activity in this area," said Harris. "You fit the profile." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Suspicious activity? The old man. It didn't make sense, and yet, here we were. "Profile," the old man repeated, voice laced with irony. Officer Briggs shifted uneasily. His partner, a younger woman named Ramirez, glanced sideways. The tension among the officers was palpable. Somewhere between prejudice and doubt, something was breaking. "Sir, we have to take you in for questioning," Harris said, stepping forward. The old man shook his head slowly. "You're arresting me for being black." The words hung heavy in the air. "No," Harris snapped. "We're arresting you because you fit the description." 5 officers now surrounded the man. Guns were raised. And then, the old man spoke again, softer this time, but with piercing clarity. "I am my brother's keeper." The words echoed, and for a moment, silence ruled. The old man's words hung in the air, seemingly simple, yet so profound that they made even the seasoned officers hesitate. "I am my brother's keeper." 5 words, but loaded with a lifetime of meaning that was about to challenge everything the SWAT team believed. Lieutenant Harris's hand trembled slightly as he lowered his weapon, eyes narrowing in confusion. His chest heaved, either from anger or shock, it was hard to tell. Officer Briggs glanced at Ramirez, whose face had softened, eyes searching the old man's calm expression as if trying to find a hidden threat. But there was none. A young boy standing at the edge of the crowd whispered to his mother, "Why do they think he's bad?" The mother tightened her grip on his hand, swallowing hard. The old man, whose name was Elijah Johnson, did not resist when they finally escorted him to the patrol car, but his dignity was intact. As they placed him inside, his eyes met the eyes of the officers, quietly daring them to see past the color of his skin. Inside the squad car, Elijah's voice was steady, his words deliberate. "I have lived in this neighborhood for over 50 years. I have worked, paid taxes, raised children who went to this same school you patrol. You see me as a threat because of my skin, but my hands have never harmed anyone." Officer Ramirez looked away, uncomfortable with the truth that was being spoken. "It's protocol," she whispered. "Protocol," Elijah repeated softly. "Protocols are written by men who fear what they do not understand. I am not your enemy." Lieutenant Harris sat in the back seat, still gripping the door handle, as if holding on to his own control. His mind raced, battling the rigid stereotypes that his upbringing and training had fed him, clashing with the undeniable reality of Elijah's humanity. Back at the precinct, the interrogation room felt colder than usual. The buzzing fluorescent lights flickered as Elijah sat calmly, waiting. His voice echoed through the empty room when he finally spoke. "I want to tell you a story." "Story time's over," Harris muttered, rubbing his temples. No, Elijah insisted. You need to hear this. And so, he began to recount a life marked by hardship, but also by resilient stories of a young boy growing up in a segregated city, of his mother's fierce love and his father's silent strength. Stories of how he fought for civil rights, of marching in protests, being beaten, but never broken. Each story pierced the hearts of the officers in the room. They had never heard these tales, not in the classroom, not in the news. They had only seen a man they thought fit a criminal profile. Ramirez's eyes filled with tears as she listened. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, the cold veneer of his authority melting away in the warmth of Elijah's words. Harris clenched his fists, the stories igniting memories of his own past, his own fears. For the first time, he saw Elijah not as a suspect, but as a man who had suffered injustice far greater than any accusation he could lay. The tension that once crackled in the air now seemed to dissolve into something heavier, more complex. Guilt. You don't belong in a jail cell, Ramirez finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Harris nodded slowly. We need to fix this. Elijah smiled, the kindness in his eyes unwavering. It's never too late to change. Word of the wrongful arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood, igniting protests and calls for justice. But Elijah's impact went beyond the headlines. His words, those 5 simple words, became a rallying cry for change. I am my brother's keeper, they chanted, reminding everyone that humanity transcends color and justice requires empathy. Days later, Harris stood in front of the community center, speaking to a crowd that once saw him as an enemy. I was wrong, he admitted. I let fear cloud my judgment. Elijah taught me something I will never forget. We are all responsible for each other. The crowd erupted in applause, not just for Harris's apology, but for the hope of a future where understanding could bridge even the deepest divides. Elijah's story continued to ripple through the city, inspiring reforms in police training and community relations. His dignity and courage transformed him from a victim into a symbol of unity. And for the SWAT team, those 5 words became a daily reminder: to see beyond the surface, to listen before judging, and to recognize that every person deserves to be their brother's keeper. The day after Elijah's release was unlike any other the city had seen in recent memory. News vans lined the streets, reporters jostling to capture his first public words. But Elijah, ever humble, arrived at the community center with a quiet resolve rather than fanfare. His presence was a beacon not because of the media attention, but because he embodied a truth that many wanted to ignore. Inside, the room was packed. Young and old, black and white. Officers and civilians all gathered to hear the man who had turned a wrongful arrest into a movement. Harris and Ramirez sat side by side in the front row, their faces marked by reflection and shame, but also hope. Elijah's voice, steady and strong despite his years, filled the space. I didn't ask to be a symbol. I'm just a man who believes we owe each other something deeper than suspicion and fear. I am my brother's keeper, not just words, but a call to action. A hush settled. These words, repeated so simply, were transforming. They cut through decades of mistrust like a blade through silk, exposing the raw heart of a community desperate to heal. Over the following weeks, Elijah met with activists, lawmakers, and police leaders. His story became a catalyst for change. Police departments started re-examining their training, acknowledging the biases that had long tainted justice. Officers like Harris and Ramirez, once part of the problem, became advocates for reform, using their own experiences to educate others. But change wasn't easy. Resistance bubbled beneath the surface. Some officers and officials dismissed Elijah as a troublemaker. Protesters clashed with police in tense demonstrations. The city was a powder keg, fragile and volatile. One night, Harris found himself alone in his apartment, the weight of the past weeks crashing down. Memories of that night on the subway steps flooded back the fear, the anger, and the moment when Elijah's 5 words shattered his worldview. He realized that his career, built on control and authority, had blinded him, not just to Elijah, but to the humanity of countless others. Meanwhile, Ramirez volunteered at local schools, sharing her story with young people, hoping to inspire them to see beyond color and fear. She carried with her the lessons Elijah had taught: empathy, patience, and courage. At the same time, Elijah continued to speak at rallies, sometimes tearing up as he recounted his experiences, other times rising with fiery passion, demanding justice not just for himself, but for everyone oppressed by systemic racism. He formed a foundation to help young black men avoid the pitfalls he had seen destroy so many lives. Education, mentorship, and community support became his mission. One afternoon, Harris received an invitation to a community dialogue hosted by Elijah's Foundation. Nervous but determined, he accepted. Walking into the room, Harris felt the eyes of dozens of people, some skeptical, some hopeful, fixed on him. He took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. I was wrong. I judged Elijah before I understood him. I acted out of fear, prejudice, and ignorance. I am here to say I want to do better. For myself, for my community, and for every person who has ever been unjustly targeted. A ripple of applause followed. Elijah stood up and embraced Harris, a gesture that stunned many. Forgiveness was not weakness, but strength. The story of Elijah and the SWAT team became a symbol of what was possible when courage met compassion. It inspired other cities to confront their own histories of racial injustice. Books were written, documentaries made. Schools incorporated Elijah's story into curriculums on civil rights and social justice. But perhaps the most profound change was within the officers themselves. Harris, once a man hardened by prejudice, became a mentor for new recruits, teaching them the importance of empathy. Ramirez, fueled by her transformation, campaigned for better police-community relations. And Elijah? He continued to be a steady, guiding light, a reminder that justice is not just about laws, but about hearts. On the anniversary of that fateful night, the city held a memorial. The same steps where Elijah had been wrongfully arrested were now adorned with murals, flowers, and plaques honoring the fight for justice. Elijah stood quietly, surrounded by friends, family, and even former officers who had once doubted him. I am my brother's keeper, he whispered, and so are you. The crowd echoed the words, a promise to never forget and to always fight for what is right. The city had changed slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Elijah Johnson's name was no longer whispered as a cautionary tale, but spoken with reverence and hope. His story had pierced the armor of prejudice, forcing a community to confront its own flaws and to envision a better future. Yet, for Elijah, the journey was far from over. The fight against systemic racism was a marathon, not a sprint, and every day brought new battles. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Elijah walked through the neighborhood that had shaped him. The air smelled of fresh rain and blooming jasmine. Children played in the streets, their laughter a balm to wounds old and new. Elijah paused by the mural on the subway steps, a vivid portrait of himself, eyes steady, words etched beneath. I am my brother's keeper. He traced the letters with his finger, feeling the weight of those words like a sacred vow. A group of young men approached, hesitant but curious. Mr. Johnson? One asked. Yes, I'm Elijah. We wanted to thank you, said another, voice thick with emotion. Because of you, we're starting to believe things can change. Elijah smiled, eyes misting. It's not just me. It's all of us together. Meanwhile, at the police precinct, change had taken root. Lieutenant Harris sat behind his desk, surrounded by new recruits. He shared the story of the night Elijah was arrested, not to justify his past mistakes, but to teach a new generation about the power of empathy. Fear and prejudice are easy, he told them. But justice requires courage to see beyond your biases. Officer Ramirez, now promoted and respected, led community outreach programs. She met regularly with neighborhood leaders, building bridges where once there were walls. Their transformation was a testament to Elijah's impact. But even as progress blossomed, resistance lingered. Not everyone welcomed change. Some old guards clung to outdated mindsets, and tensions occasionally flared during protests and police encounters. One particularly heated night, Elijah received a call. There's unrest near the old precinct, a community leader warned. They're saying the police haven't changed. Elijah knew what this meant. A moment of reckoning was near. He arrived at the scene, greeted by a crowd pulsing with frustration and pain. Flames flickered in trash bins, chants rose like thunder. Officers stood in tense lines, shields raised, eyes wary. Elijah stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. Brothers and sisters, he began, voice carrying over the chaos. I know your pain. I've lived it. But violence will not heal these wounds. We must be the change we seek. The crowd hesitated. Slowly, voices softened. From the police line, Harris emerged, walking toward Elijah. "We've come a long way, but not far enough," Harris admitted. "I'm here to listen and to act." That night marked a turning point. Dialogue replaced confrontation. Plans for reform accelerated. Community and police began building trust brick by brick. Months later, Elijah stood before a packed auditorium at a city hall hearing. Officials, activists, and citizens gathered to hear proposals for systemic reform. Elijah spoke with the passion of a man who had seen both darkness and light. "We must dismantle the structures that allow racism to thrive," he declared. "But more than policies, we need hearts willing to change. Because justice without compassion is no justice at all." His words resonated deeply, sparking commitments that promised to reshape the city's future. Years passed. Elijah's foundation grew, supporting countless young people, advocating for equity, and fostering dialogue across divides. On a bright spring morning, a new mural was unveiled downtown, a depiction of Elijah standing among children of all races, holding hands under the words, "I am my brother's keeper." Elijah, now older and frielier, stood beside Harris and Ramirez. The three shared a quiet moment, a testament to how far they had come. As the crowd applauded, Elijah reflected on the journey from a wrongful arrest born of racial prejudice to a movement that rekindled hope and demanded justice. He knew the road ahead would still be long and difficult, but those 5 words, "I am my brother's keeper," would continue to light the way. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.